The receipt printer blinked once, then went silent, and in that silence, I realized my money was no longer mine. I stood there at the bank counter, my hand still resting on the smooth marble surface, waiting for the machine to spit out something, anything, that would make sense of what had just happened. The young teller looked at me with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the kind of smile you give someone when you're not sure if they're confused or if you're about to deliver bad news. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said gently, lowering her voice as if the words themselves might bruise me. "But this account has restrictions. You'll need authorization from the primary controller." Primary controller. I repeated the words in my mind, slowly, as if they belonged to a foreign language. I had opened this account 32 years ago, back when my husband, Robert, and I still argued over which bank offered the better interest rates. I remembered sitting at this very branch, signing my name with a pen that kept skipping, laughing when Robert joked that my signature looked like a doctor's prescription. And now, somehow, I needed permission to access it. "There must be some mistake," I said, keeping my voice steady, the way I had learned to do over a lifetime of keeping peace. "This is my account." The teller hesitated, then turned her screen slightly, just enough for me to see a name that didn't belong there, at least not in that position. Daniel Carter. My son. For a moment, the world didn't tilt or spin or shatter the way people say it does in moments like these. It simply narrowed. The fluorescent lights above seemed too bright, the hum of the air conditioner too loud, every sound pressing in on me until all I could hear was the quiet, steady realization settling into place. I reached into my purse with hands that felt strangely calm and pulled out my phone. It took me 2 tries to unlock it. When Daniel answered, his voice came through warm, casual, as if I had called to ask about the weather. "Hey, Mom." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Daniel," I said, "I'm at the bank. They're telling me I can't access my account." There was a pause on the other end, not long, just enough to confirm that he already knew. "Yeah," he said finally, his tone shifting into something softer, something practiced. "I was meaning to talk to you about that." I closed my eyes for a brief second, not out of weakness, but to hold on to the version of my son I had carried for nearly 40 years, the little boy who used to press dandelions into my hand and call them treasures. "Talk to me now," I said. Another pause, then a small sigh, as if I were the one making this difficult. "Mom," he began, "I took control of the account because I'm worried about you. It's just for your own good." The words landed quietly, almost gently, but they settled somewhere deep, somewhere that recognized the shape of them immediately. Not concern, not protection, control. I opened my eyes and looked at the teller, who was now pretending to organize papers, giving me the illusion of privacy. "For my own good," I repeated, tasting the phrase as if it might reveal something different the second time. "Yes," Daniel said, more firmly now, as if repeating it would make it true. "You don't need to deal with all this financial stuff anymore. It's too much. I've got it handled." I glanced at the screen again, at his name sitting where mine had always been, and for the first time, a question surfaced, quiet but sharp. When had my life become something that needed to be handled by someone else? I thanked the teller, though I wasn't sure why, and stepped away from the counter, my footsteps slow, measured, as if I were walking out of a place I no longer belonged. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched across the parking lot, warm and familiar, unchanged by what had just happened inside. I stood there for a moment, the phone still in my hand, Daniel's voice lingering in my ear, and I realized something that didn't come with panic or anger, but with a clarity so precise it almost felt like relief. This hadn't started today. This hadn't begun at the bank counter or with a denied withdrawal. This had been happening quietly, piece by piece, in conversations I had dismissed, in questions I had answered without thinking, in small decisions I had allowed others to make on my behalf. And now, standing there with the sun on my face and my own account out of reach, I understood that whatever this was, it wasn't about helping me. It was about replacing me. And that was something I was not ready to let happen. I did not go back inside the bank. I stood there in the parking lot a little longer than necessary, watching a silver sedan struggle to pull into a tight space, listening to the distant hum of traffic, letting the world continue as if nothing had shifted beneath my feet. Because for everyone else, nothing had. For me, everything had moved just enough to feel wrong. By the time I got back into my car, I had already decided not to call Daniel again. Not yet. I knew that tone in his voice, the careful balance between patience and quiet authority, the way he spoke as if he had already solved a problem I did not know I had. That tone did not come from nowhere. It had been building, slowly, over the past year, maybe longer. I started the engine and drove home the same way I always did, turning right at the corner with the faded stop sign, passing the small grocery store where the owner still nodded at me every Tuesday morning, stopping at the light that always seemed to stay red longer than it should. Everything looked the same. That was the unsettling part. When I pulled into my driveway, the house stood exactly as I had left it that morning, quiet, steady, familiar. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and set my purse on the small wooden table by the entryway, the one Robert had insisted we buy even though I thought it was too narrow to be useful. It had held our keys for 3 decades. I slipped my debit card out and placed it there carefully, as if putting it down might somehow return it to me. It did not. The house felt different, not because anything had changed, but because I was looking at it differently. The kitchen counter where I sorted my bills every Sunday afternoon. The drawer where I kept every receipt, neatly stacked and labeled by month. The calendar on the wall with small, precise notes in blue ink, marking due dates, appointments, reminders. I walked over to it and ran my fingers along the edge of the paper. Electric bill, due on the 15th. Prescription refill, every 30 days. Property tax. Installment, scheduled for next month. I had never missed a payment. Not once. Not when Robert was sick. Not when the hospital bills started to pile up. Not when I had to learn, at 66, how to manage everything alone. I had done it quietly, without asking for help, without making it anyone else's burden. And yet, somewhere along the way, someone had decided I could not do it anymore. I moved to the kitchen table and sat down, folding my hands in front of me, the way I used to when I needed to think something through without letting emotion take over. The first time Daniel mentioned my finances had been last fall. We were sitting right here, sharing coffee that had gone slightly cold because we talked too long about nothing in particular. He had asked, casually, how much I was spending on groceries each month. I had answered without thinking, because there had been no reason not to. Then he asked about my insurance, my utilities, whether I had considered simplifying things. At the time, I thought it was concern. It felt like concern. A son checking on his mother. But now, sitting in the same chair, I could hear it differently. Each question had not been about understanding my life. It had been about measuring it. A few weeks later, Brianna had started using phrases that sounded kind on the surface, but left something behind that I could not quite name. You should not have to deal with all that paperwork anymore. It must be exhausting keeping track of everything by yourself. We can make things easier for you. Easier. The word lingered in my mind now, heavier than it had any right to be. Easier did not mean lighter. It meant smaller. I stood up and walked to the small cabinet where I kept my documents, opening it slowly, expecting to find everything exactly where I had left it. Most of it was. The folders were still aligned, labeled in my handwriting, but something felt off, like a picture that had been moved just slightly out of place. I pulled out my bank statements and flipped through them, scanning dates, amounts, signatures. Nothing obvious jumped out at me. No missing pages, no strange transactions. And yet, I could not shake the feeling that I was looking at something that had already been rearranged before. I had a chance to notice. I closed the folder and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of paper that suddenly felt heavier than it should. This had not started at the bank. It had not even started with Daniel's phone call. It had started in small conversations, in gentle suggestions, in questions that seemed harmless until they were not. And the most unsettling part was not that they had taken control. It was how carefully they had led me to a place where it could happen without a fight. I did not sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind would not settle into the quiet rhythm it usually found after sunset. Instead, it moved slowly, deliberately, like someone walking through a familiar house with a flashlight, stopping at each corner, each drawer, each memory, checking what was still there and what might have been taken without notice. Around 3 a.m, I got up, careful not to turn on too many lights, and made my way back to the kitchen. The digital clock on the microwave blinked softly, casting a faint blue glow across the counter. I poured myself a glass of water and stood there, listening to the stillness of the house, the kind of stillness that used to feel peaceful but now felt like it was waiting for something. I opened the small drawer by the sink where I kept my spare keys, rubber bands, and old receipts that I had not yet sorted. Everything looked ordinary. That was the problem. It all looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. I took out my phone and opened my banking application again, even though I already knew what I would see. The login screen appeared, unchanged, but when I entered my information, the response was immediate and final. Access denied. Please contact the account administrator. Administrator. Another word that did not belong to me anymore. I set the phone down slowly and pulled out a chair, sitting with my hands resting on the table, palms flat against the wood as if I needed to ground myself in something real. My mind drifted back to a conversation from early spring, one I had not thought about until now. Daniel had come over on a Sunday afternoon, bringing takeout from that Italian place he liked, the one that always used too much garlic. Brianna had come with him, carrying a neatly labeled folder, which I remember noticing at the time but not questioning. We had eaten at this same table, laughing about something trivial, and then, almost seamlessly, the conversation had shifted. "Mom, we were thinking," Daniel had said, wiping his hands on a napkin. "It might be a good idea to organize some of your paperwork. Just in case." Just in case. I had smiled, telling him everything was already organized, that I had a system that worked for me. Brianna had leaned forward slightly, her expression soft, her voice gentle. "Of course you do," she had said. "We just want to make sure everything is streamlined. You know, so nothing falls through the cracks." At the time, it had sounded reasonable, thoughtful even. I remembered getting up, walking over to the cabinet, and pulling out my folders to show them how everything was labeled, how each bill, each statement, each document had its place. I remembered Brianna nodding, smiling, complimenting my system. "This is great," she had said. "Really, Evelyn, you have done such a good job." But now, sitting in the quiet kitchen with that memory laid out in front of me, I saw something I had missed. The way her eyes had lingered on certain pages. The way Daniel had asked to take a quick picture of my insurance documents, just for reference. The way they had both watched as I put everything back, as if memorizing not just the contents, but the order. I stood up and walked back to the cabinet again, this time moving more slowly, more carefully. I opened the drawer beneath it, the one I rarely used, where I kept older records, things I did not need every day but could not bring myself to throw away. Inside, beneath a stack of old envelopes, I found a copy of a document I did not remember printing. It was not unfamiliar, but it was not something I had filled out myself either. It was a form related to account access, partially completed, with my name typed neatly at the top. My signature was there, or at least something that looked very much like it, but the ink was slightly darker than I remembered using, the line just a little too smooth, as if it had been practiced. I stared at it. For a long moment, not with shock, but with a growing sense of clarity. This had not been a single decision made in a moment of concern. It had been a process, a series of steps, each one small enough to seem harmless, each one wrapped in care and convenience, each one bringing me a little closer to where I was now. I placed the paper back where I found it, not because I was unsure, but because I understood something important in that moment. They believed I had not noticed. They believed I would not question it. They believed I would accept it, the way I had accepted so many small changes before. I returned to the kitchen table and sat down again, the first hint of morning light beginning to press against the edges of the window. And for the first time since the teller had spoken those careful words at the bank, I felt something shift inside me, not fear, not confusion, but a quiet, steady resolve forming beneath the surface. If this had been done step by step, then it could be undone the same way. By the time the sun fully rose, the house no longer felt like a place of rest. It felt like a place I needed to read carefully, the way you read a contract line by line, looking for what was not said as much as what was. I moved through each room slowly that morning, not searching for anything obvious, but noticing everything I had once overlooked. The stack of mail on the kitchen counter was thinner than usual. Not empty, just lighter. I picked it up and flipped through it, one envelope at a time, checking names, dates, return addresses. Utility bill. Grocery store flyer. A handwritten card from Martha I had not opened yet. But something was missing, though I could not name it at first. Then it came to me, not as a realization, but as an absence. There were no bank envelopes. Not this week. Not last week either, if I remembered correctly. I set the stack down and stood very still, letting that detail settle into place. I had always received paper statements, even after I learned to check things online. It was a habit Robert and I had kept, something tangible, something that could not be changed with a password. And now, without any conversation, without any request from me, they had simply stopped arriving. I walked over to the trash bin by the side of the house, the one I usually took out every Thursday morning. The lid creaked slightly as I lifted it, the smell of yesterday's coffee grounds and folded newspaper drifting up. I did not dig through it. I did not need to. The absence was enough. I closed the lid and went back inside, my steps slower now, more deliberate. In the living room, I paused by the bookshelf where Robert used to keep his ledgers, thick notebooks filled with careful handwriting, every expense recorded in a way that felt almost old-fashioned now. I had not opened them in years, but I remembered the way he used to say that numbers told the truth, even when people did not. I reached for one of the books and ran my fingers along the spine, then set it back in place. This was not about numbers anymore. This was about control of the story those numbers told. Around mid-morning, my phone rang. I looked at the screen before answering. Brianna. Her name sat there, bright and neat, as if it belonged in my day the way it once had. I let it ring twice before picking up. Evelyn, she said, her voice warm, almost cheerful, the kind of tone you use when everything is already decided. I was just thinking about you. How are you feeling today? The question was simple, but something about it felt rehearsed, as if the answer did not really matter. I am fine, I said. I went to the bank yesterday. There was a pause, just a fraction of a second, but enough. Oh, she replied softly. Daniel mentioned he spoke to you. We were hoping you would understand. Understand. Another word that sounded gentle until you held it up to the light. Understand what? I asked. I kept my voice even, not pushing, not accusing, just asking. That it is time to make things easier for you, she said. You have done so much on your own for so long. It is okay to let someone else take care of things now. I walked slowly to the kitchen table and sat down, my eyes resting on the neat stack of bills I had already sorted for the week. I have been taking care of things. Just fine, I said. Of course you have, she replied quickly, her tone brightening, as if agreement would smooth over everything else. But this is not about whether you can. It is about whether you should. Whether you should. The words settled between us, quiet but firm, drawing a line I had not agreed to cross. I let a small silence stretch before speaking again. When did my name stop being enough on my own account? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. It is not like that, she said, though she did not explain what it was like. We are just trying to protect you. Protect. I had heard that word twice now. Once from my son, once from his wife. It sounded different each time, but it carried the same weight. Not protection from something outside. Protection from myself. I ended the call politely, the way I always had, thanking her for checking in, telling her I would speak to Daniel soon. When I set the phone down, I did not feel anger. I felt something clearer than that. A pattern, finally visible, no longer hidden behind kind words and careful timing. They had not taken control in one bold move. They had built it, quietly, piece by piece, until it looked reasonable, until it sounded like care, until it could be explained in a single sentence that left no room for argument. And sitting there at my own table, with my own bills in front of me and my own name somehow no longer enough, I understood that if I wanted my life back, I would have to stop answering their questions and start asking my own. That afternoon, I did something I had not done in a very long time. I called Martha before she called me. She picked up on the second ring, just like she always did, her voice steady and familiar, the kind of voice that did not rush to fill silence, but knew how to sit with it. Evelyn, she said, I was just about to make tea. You sound like you could use some. I almost smiled at that, though it did not quite reach my face. I went to the bank yesterday, I said, not easing into it, not softening the edges. There was a pause on her end, not confused, not surprised, just attentive. And, she asked quietly. And, I was told I need permission to access my own account. I let the words settle between us, listening to how they sounded when spoken out loud. Martha did not respond immediately. She never did when something mattered. Who has the permission? She asked after a moment. Daniel, I said. And I think Brianna had more to do with it than he is willing to admit. Another pause, longer this time, but not empty. I could almost hear her thinking, placing each piece where it belonged. When did this start? She asked. It was a simple question, but it landed differently than the ones I had been asked lately. It did not assume. It invited me to look. Not yesterday, I said slowly. Not even last week. It started in conversations. Questions. Small things that did not seem important at the time. I told her about the dinner in the spring, about the folder Brianna brought, about the questions Daniel asked that I had answered without hesitation. I told her about the missing mail, the denied access, the words they both used that sounded like care, but felt like something else. Martha listened without interrupting, the way she had when Robert passed, the way she had when I first learned how quiet a house could be. When I finished, she let a few seconds pass before speaking. You are not confused, she said. Not a question. A statement. No, I replied. I am not. Saying it out loud felt important, like placing a marker in the ground. Good, she said. Because what you are describing is not help. It is control dressed up as help. The words were direct, but they did not feel harsh. They felt accurate. I keep thinking I should have seen it sooner, I said, glancing at the stack of papers on my table. That I missed something obvious. Evelyn, Martha said gently, people do not start with something obvious when they want you to accept it. They start small. They start reasonable. They make it feel like your idea. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting that settle. It fit too well. What do I do now? I asked. It was the first time I had asked that question without trying to answer it myself first. Martha did not hesitate this time. You slow everything down, she said. You do not argue with them yet. You do not let them know what you have noticed. And you find out exactly what they did, how they did it, and what you can undo. I opened my eyes and looked around my kitchen again, but this time I was not just seeing what had changed. I was seeing what could be used. The bank, I said. There was a manager. He looked at me like he knew something was off. Then you go back, Martha replied. Not as someone asking for permission, but as someone asking for information. Her words were simple, but they shifted something inside me. Not in a dramatic way, not all at once, but enough to feel the difference. I was no longer standing in the middle of something happening to me. I was standing at the edge of something I could begin to understand. And Evelyn, Martha added, her voice softening just slightly. Do not let them rush you into anything else. People who do this rely on speed. They rely on you feeling like you have to accept it quickly. I thought about the way Daniel had spoken, the way Brianna had framed everything as something already decided. They have been moving quickly, I said. Then you move slower, she replied. And you watch. After we hung up, I did not move right away. I sat at the table, my hands resting on either side of the papers, not touching them yet. The house was still quiet, but it felt different now, not like something waiting to happen, but like something waiting to be understood. I reached for my folder again, opened it, and this time I was not looking for what was missing. I was looking for what had been changed, what had been added, what did not belong. And for the first time since this began, I was not trying to make sense of their explanation. I was starting to build my own. I went back to the bank the next morning, but this time I did not stand in line right away. I walked in slowly, taking in the same space that had felt so unfamiliar the day before, noticing the quiet hum of conversation, the clicking of keyboards, the steady rhythm of a place where people came to manage their lives in numbers and signatures. Nothing about it had changed, and yet everything about how I moved through it had. I approached the front desk and asked, in a calm voice, to speak with the branch manager. The receptionist smiled politely, asked me to have a seat, and within a few minutes, I was being led into a small office with glass walls that offered just enough privacy to feel separate, but not enough to feel hidden. Mr. Collins stood when I entered, extending his hand with a professionalism that felt genuine rather than rehearsed. Mrs. Carter, he said, please have a seat. I sat down across from him, placing my purse neatly on my lap, my posture straight, my hands still. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He seemed to be waiting, not impatiently, but with the kind of attention that suggested he understood this was not a routine visit. I was here yesterday. I began, keeping my voice steady, and I was told that my account now requires authorization from someone else. He nodded once, not interrupting. I would like to understand exactly what was done, how it was done, and when. I did not raise my voice. I did not sound upset. I simply asked. Mr. Collins folded his hands on the desk and glanced briefly at his computer before looking back at me. I understand, he said. And you have every right to that information. The words settled differently than anything I had heard in the past 2 days. Not reassurance. Not explanation. Recognition. He turned his screen slightly toward me and began to walk me through the account history. Approximately 6 weeks ago, he said, a limited power of authorization was submitted, granting your son certain controls over account access and transaction permissions. 6 weeks. I let that number sit in my mind, placing it against the timeline I had begun to piece together. Early spring. The dinner. The folder. The questions. Was I present when this was submitted? I asked. Mr. Collins hesitated, just briefly, but I saw it. According to the documentation, he said carefully, the authorization form includes your signature. Includes my signature. I nodded slowly. And what documentation was provided to support that authorization? I continued. He clicked through a few screens, his expression remaining neutral, but more focused now. There was a statement included indicating concern about your ability to manage financial matters independently, he said. It was presented as a precautionary measure, not a full transfer of control. Concern about my ability. The phrase echoed quietly, not with shock, but with confirmation. Who provided that statement? I asked. Mr. Collins met my eyes this time, and for a moment, the professionalism softened into something more human. It was submitted by your son, with supporting notes from his spouse, he said. There it was. Not hidden. Not denied. Simply stated. I leaned back slightly in my chair, not in defeat, but to create space for the pieces to settle into place. And was there any independent verification of that concern? I asked. Any evaluation, any direct conversation with me? Mr. Collins shook his head. No, ma'am. In cases like this, the bank relies on the documentation provided, unless there is a clear reason to question its validity. Unless there is a clear reason. I let a small silence follow, not uncomfortable, but deliberate. Do you see a reason to question it now? I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me, really looked this time, not at my age, not at my file, but at me as I sat there, composed, precise, aware. Based on our conversation, he said slowly, I believe it would be appropriate to review the authorization more closely. I nodded once. That was all I needed. Not an apology, not a reversal, just acknowledgement that something was not right. I would like a full copy of every document that was submitted, I said, and I would like to know exactly what steps are required to revoke or amend this authorization. My voice remained even, but there was no uncertainty in it now. Mr. Collins typed a few notes, then looked back at me. I can prepare those documents for you today, he said, and I can also outline the process for restoring full control to you, if that is your intention. If that is your intention. The choice, finally, placed back where it belonged. It is, I replied. I stood up, smoothing my coat slightly, not out of habit, but as a quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted. As I walked out of the office, the bank did not feel unfamiliar anymore. It felt like a place where something had been taken quietly, and where I had just begun, to take it back. I did not open the envelope from the bank right away when I got home. I set it on the kitchen table, right in the center, where the light from the window could fall directly across it, as if clarity required the right angle. The paper was heavier than the usual mail, the kind that carried weight not because of what it was made of, but because of what it contained. I took off my coat, hung it carefully by the door, and moved through my routine the same way I always had, rinsing a cup, wiping the counter, adjusting the curtains just slightly to let in more light. It was not avoidance. It was preparation. By the time I finally sat down, the house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that no longer felt empty, but deliberate. I opened the envelope slowly, not out of hesitation, but to control the pace of what I was about to see. Inside were copies of everything Mr. Collins had promised. The authorization form, the supporting statement, the timeline. I placed each document side by side, aligning the edges until they formed a neat, intentional spread across the table. My name appeared on every page, typed clearly, signed carefully, and yet, as I looked closer, I saw the differences I had not been trained to ignore. The signature was mine, but not mine at the same time. The curve of the letters was slightly too smooth, the pressure too even, as if someone had practiced it enough times to remove the hesitation that makes a signature human. I did not react. I simply noted it. I moved to the next page. The statement of concern. It was written in a tone I recognized immediately, calm, structured, polite, and deeply misleading. It described me as increasingly forgetful, occasionally confused about bills, overwhelmed by routine financial tasks. It spoke of missed payments that had never been missed, of risks that had never existed, of a gradual decline that had never occurred. At the bottom of the page were two names. Daniel Carter. Brianna Carter. I read it twice, not because I needed to understand it, but because I needed to feel the weight of it fully. Not the words themselves, but the decision behind them. This had not been a moment of worry. It had been a narrative, a version of me that they had written carefully enough to be believed. I leaned back in my chair, letting my hands rest in my lap, allowing the silence to expand just enough to hold what I had just seen. I thought about the way Brianna had spoken on the phone, about making things easier, about not having to deal with everything anymore. I thought about Daniel's voice, steady and certain, as if he had already convinced himself that what he was doing was right. And I understood something then that I had not fully allowed myself to see before. They did not think they were taking something from me. They thought they were replacing something in me. Replacing my judgment, my memory, my voice. I reached forward again and gathered the papers into a single stack, tapping them lightly against the table to align them, the way Robert used to do with his ledgers. Order mattered, not because it changed the truth, but because it made the truth easier to see. I stood up and walked to the cabinet where I kept my most important documents, opening a drawer I had not touched in months. Inside, beneath insurance policies and old tax records, was a folder labeled in Robert's handwriting. Important. I pulled it out and placed it on the table, opening it with a care that felt almost ceremonial. Inside were documents we had prepared years ago, not because we expected something to go wrong, but because we believed in being ready if it did. Power of attorney forms, medical directives, instructions written clearly, signed properly, witnessed, and dated. None of them granted Daniel control over my finances without my direct and current consent. None of them described me as incapable. None of them resembled what was now sitting in front of me. I let out a slow breath, not heavy, not emotional, just steady. This was not confusion. This was contradiction. I returned the folder to its place and closed the drawer gently. When I sat back down, I did not feel the need to call Daniel. Not yet. I did not feel the need to confront Brianna or to explain what I had found. There would be a time for that, but it was not now. Now was for understanding the shape of what had been done, and more importantly, the shape of what needed to be undone. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Martha's name, pausing for just a moment before pressing call. When she answered, I did not begin with what I felt. I began with what I knew. They wrote a story about me, I said quietly, and now I know exactly how they told it. After I hung up with Martha, I did not move right away. I sat there with the papers still in front of me, the words no longer confusing, no longer overwhelming, just clear. Clarity has a quiet way of changing things. It does not rush. It does not demand. It simply removes what was hiding the truth. I gathered the documents again, this time not as evidence of what had been done to me, but as tools for what I would do next. I placed them into a new folder, one that had been empty until that moment, and wrote a single word across the tab in my own handwriting. Control. Not because I had it yet, but because I was in the process of taking it back. The rest of the afternoon moved slowly, but with purpose. I made a list, not on my phone, not on a computer, but on paper. Each step written out clearly, in order, the way Robert used to plan things when he wanted nothing to be missed. Request full revocation process from the bank. Open a new account under my sole authority. Redirect all incoming deposits. Update beneficiaries. Secure physical documents. Review every authorization ever signed in the past 6 months. I did not rush through it. I wrote each word carefully, letting the act itself anchor me. This was not about reacting. This was about rebuilding. Later that evening, Daniel called. I let it ring once, twice, before answering. Mom, he said, his voice carrying that same careful tone, but now there was something else beneath it. A trace of expectation. I was thinking we could stop by tomorrow, just to go over a few things with you. Make sure everything is set up the right way. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes resting on the folder in front of me. That would be fine, I said calmly. Tomorrow works. There was a small shift on the other end of the line, almost relief. Great, he replied. Brianna has been organizing some options that might make things easier for you going forward. Easier. The word came again, softer this time, almost rehearsed. I look forward to seeing them, I said. My voice did not change. It did not need to. When the call ended, I did not feel tension. I felt timing. They believed they were coming to guide me, to present solutions, to move the next piece into place. I stood up and walked to the hallway closet, reaching for a small metal box I had not opened in years. Inside were items I had kept not because I needed them, but because they represented something I did not want to forget. My marriage certificate, the deed to the house, old identification cards. I checked each one, making sure everything was exactly where it should be. Nothing missing, nothing altered. I closed the box and returned it to its place, then went back to the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second passing without urgency, without pressure. That was the difference now. I was no longer moving at their pace. I was setting my own. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I could not sleep, but because I had already rested enough. I made my coffee the same way I always did, measuring each scoop, waiting for the slow drip, pouring it into the same mug I had used for years. Routine had not been taken from me. It had simply been overshadowed. I sat at the table and reviewed my list again, not to add anything, but to confirm that I had not missed anything. By the time I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, I was ready, not in the sense of confrontation, but in the sense of understanding exactly where I stood. The front door opened with a familiar sound, followed by Brianna's voice, light and polished. "Evelyn, we are here." I stood up slowly, smoothing the edge of my sweater, not out of habit, but out of intention. When I stepped into the living room, they were both there, Daniel standing near the window, Brianna holding a neatly organized folder, just like before. For a brief moment, the scene looked almost identical to that afternoon months ago. The same positioning, the same expressions, the same sense of quiet control. But this time, something was different. Not in them. In me. I smiled, not warmly, not coldly, but steadily. "Come in," I said. And as they stepped further into my home, carrying their plans, their explanations, their carefully prepared version of what should happen next, I realized they still believed they were ahead of me. And for the first time since this began, I knew they were not. Daniel stepped forward first, as he always did, positioning himself slightly ahead of Brianna, as if that made the decisions easier to deliver. She followed just behind him, placing her folder carefully on my coffee table, her movements precise, rehearsed, almost identical to the way I remembered them months ago. "We brought everything you might need," she said with a small, polished smile, "just to make this transition smoother." Transition. Another word that sounded gentle until you understood what it was replacing. I gestured for them to sit, then took my place in the chair across from them, not at the end of the table, not in the background, but directly facing them. For a moment, no one spoke. Daniel glanced at Brianna, and she opened the folder, revealing neatly arranged pages, tabs labeled in soft colors, everything designed to look organized, reasonable, helpful. "We have been looking into a few options," she began, her voice calm, controlled. "Ways to simplify things for you. Reduce the burden. Make sure everything is managed properly moving forward." I nodded slightly, as if considering her words, though I had already heard them before, in different forms, in different tones. "That sounds thorough," I said. My voice remained even, neutral. "Before we go through that, I have something I would like to understand." Daniel shifted slightly in his seat, just enough to reveal a hint of unease beneath his calm expression. "Of course," he said quickly. "What is it?" I reached to the table beside me and picked up my folder, placing it gently in front of them. Not forcefully, not dramatically, just present. "I went back to the bank," I said. The room grew quieter, though no one moved. I spoke with the manager. I requested copies of every document related to my account. Brianna's hand paused briefly over her folder, then resumed its place, resting lightly on the edge. "That is good," she said. "It is important that you feel informed." Feel informed. I opened my folder and slid the authorization form across the table, aligning it carefully with the edge. "I am informed," I replied. "I would just like to confirm a few details with you." Daniel looked down at the paper, his expression tightening just slightly, not enough for someone who did not know him to notice, but enough for me. "You signed this," he said, his voice measured, controlled. We talked about it. I held his gaze, not challenging, not yielding. Did we? I asked quietly. I let the question sit there, not as an accusation, but as an opening. Brianna leaned forward then, her tone softening. Evelyn, you may not remember every detail, but we went over everything together. You agreed that it would be safer this way. Safer. I nodded once, slowly. That is what the statement says, I replied, turning to the second document and placing it beside the first. It also says that I have been missing payments, that I have been confused about routine finances, that I am no longer able to manage things independently. I paused just long enough for the words to settle. When did that begin? Daniel shifted again, this time more noticeably. Mom, this is not about labeling you. It is about making sure you are protected. From what? I asked. The question was simple, direct. It left no room for soft explanations. Neither of them answered immediately. Brianna's expression remained composed, but there was a stillness in it now, a calculation that had not been there before. From mistakes, she said finally. From things that could go wrong. I folded my hands in my lap, the papers resting quietly between us. I have not made those mistakes, I said. Not one. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. And yet, this document says that I have. It presents a version of me that does not exist. I leaned forward slightly, just enough to close the distance without breaking the calm. So I am asking you again. When did that begin? Daniel looked at Brianna this time, not for support, but for direction. It was a small shift, but it told me everything I needed to know. The silence stretched, no longer comfortable, no longer controlled by them. Finally, I reached into my folder and pulled out another set of papers, placing them on top of theirs. These are the original documents your father and I prepared, I said, my voice steady. They outline exactly how decisions like this are meant to be made. With my consent. With proper verification. With truth. I met Daniel's eyes again, holding them this time. None of that happened. The room felt different now, not tense, not loud, but clear. The careful structure they had built, word by word, step by step, was no longer holding its shape. I have already begun the process of restoring full control of my account, I continued. Every document you submitted is being reviewed. Every authorization is being questioned. And every decision moving forward will be made by me. I sat back then, not as a retreat, but as a conclusion. You said this was for my own good, I added quietly. What you did took my name off my own life. I let the words settle, not to wound, but to define. And in the silence that followed, I did not need them to agree. I did not need them to explain. Because for the first time since this began, I was no longer being managed, corrected, or guided. I was being heard. And more importantly, I was being